One. Hebrews 11 and verse 1 says, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen." I'll read that again. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. As Christians, we hope. At least I hope we hope. And we hope because of our faith. Last week I talked about our inheritance, our heavenly inheritance. And this conversation keeps coming up. On Wednesday, we talked this past Wednesday about heaven, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But you know, the question was posed: what's heaven look like? What does it look like? And it made me realize there are two things that we don't talk enough about here. One is heaven, and the other is hell. So I'm going to talk a little bit about heaven just because it tied into what we were doing last week. And based on that question and based on the studies that Brent's doing on Wednesday as it relates to heaven, I think we need to talk about it. And we need to know when we talk to people about the hope that we have and the faith that we live out, what that looks like. Peter says, always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that you have. If somebody asks us, give me a reason for the hope that you have in Jesus Christ, if we answer them with a blank stare, it's not really a good thing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and I've been practicing my faith and having hope this past week because we are now 4 days away from going to Ecuador, and I still don't have a passport. So I have faith in our, I almost said government, but I'm going to say I have faith in my God. And I hope that I get my passport by Wednesday because we're leaving Thursday. So I'm now down to 3 days, and the clock is ticking pretty quickly. But I do have faith. I'm not worried about it. It'll happen. But I recently watched part of a debate, and I only watched part of a debate because I can't watch Dan Barker for very long. But the debate was with Dan Barker. He is a guy who used to be a preacher and is now an atheist. He's a very public, one of the best, or not best known, let me rephrase that, one of the most known atheists. So he's the one who sues organizations, both government organizations and Christian organizations. I think he is the founder of, what's it called, the Freedom From Religion organization. So you may have heard of that organization. They just basically go around and sue people trying to take God out of everything. Dan Barker used to be a preacher rather, is now an atheist. And so I was watching this debate, and I thought he was going to have like this really strong argument because he's going, up against Christian scholars, and and he's trying to refute them, and he's trying to prove that there is no God. And I'm watching this, and he said in this debate, I was a preacher, and I used to really believe in God, and I wasn't faking it. I could feel God moving, and I thought that I saw God in just about everything, and I believed in a divine creation. And he's going on, and he said, and you know what changed my mind? I stopped and I said, can we really know that there's an existence beyond the earth? And if there is an existence beyond the earth, can we feel it? So he said, I started asking God, if you really exist, give me a feeling and let me know. Let me know about your existence. Speak to me, talk to me. You claim that you're there, so show yourself. And he said, and then I felt nothing. That was his whole argument. And I was like, let's think about that logically as Christians, because I think as Christians, we need to be able to refute that. And I think it's really easy to refute that. Okay, and Brent, I think Brent's answer was about as accurate as possible. What does heaven look like when we get there? His answer is, we don't know. I think that's a right answer and a good answer, and I think we need to be okay with that answer. So, how can we be okay with that answer? We don't know what heaven looks like. I put this picture up here because it was just kind of a reminder, first of all, of God's beauty. You know, this is, I presume, taken here on this earth. Hopefully not from another planet, because that would just be weird. But we all know of places that have just taken our breath away, right? Have we all been to places where you show up and it just triggers every sense inside of you and you feel how amazing God is? You just, people try to describe it to you, and you're like, yep, sounds nice, sounds pretty, and then you show up, and it blows your world away. It blows your mind, right? We've all experienced this. So I was thinking about this, and I thought, okay, why does Scripture not go to great lengths to describe what heaven looks like? And I thought, well, because, first of all, it's a waste of time. Because we're going to be like, sounds nice, sounds pretty, sounds wonderful. But when we get there, that's when we realize how amazing it is. Now, my question is, if we can't describe it perfectly to where it just blows our mind or makes us, as Dan Barker wants, this feeling that exists, does that mean that the place does not exist? No. There are places, plenty of places, where people have described to me, and I believe them. I believe that this place exists. I believe it's every bit as powerful and wonderful and magnificent as they say it is. But I've never been there. I've never had a feeling about this place. I've never felt drawn to this place. I just know it exists because I see pictures of it or people describe it, so I know it exists. I think the same is very true of heaven. We know it exists because God, our Maker, tells us it exists. Just because we can't feel it or sense it doesn't mean that it's not real. Doesn't mean that it's not existent. And I'll give you an example, and this is this kind of cool, a cool example. Whenever we went to Haiti, Eden and Bill, Marianne, and I, we went to Haiti back in March. And when you go to Haiti, I tried to show a video, but it wouldn't load right. But it was just a video of us driving along, and their roads are just so wild because people are walking all over the place, and there are animals in the road, and cows walking down the road, and goats, and it's just completely packed and very stressful. And you look and you're driving, and there's debris and trash everywhere because it's just poverty. They don't have trash pickup places, and it's just not real sanitary. So you just look, and there's just poverty and trash and people just trying to make it from day to day. And Steph and Ronnie were telling us that just on the backside of this mountain was this beautiful beach. They're like, it's just so surreal. And Stephanie described it in great detail. And she's like, in my mind, I couldn't really get a good picture of it. Even though she was given tremendous detail, I couldn't get a good picture of it in my mind because all I saw was poverty and trash. And my brain couldn't imagine that just 2 miles on the other side of this mountain were these gorgeous, pristine, beautiful, unlittered, uninhabited beaches. My mind couldn't comprehend it. So my question is, did that make these beaches any less real? Not at all. So we started the trek. We went up over the hill and down over the other side. And lo and behold, we come to this beautiful beach. that took your breath away. It was absolutely gorgeous and pristine, and everything that Steph described, we felt. We now experienced it. I think this is really what heaven is going to be like. So Paul describes it this way in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. If you want to follow along in your Bibles, you can, but it's up here on the screen. Paul says, "For we know that if the tent that is our earthly home is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens." Now, why is he describing it as a house? Right? We know that in heaven there's not going to be a house, but he's describing it that way because we can at least get a picture of what it looks like. He says we have this building from God, a house not made with hands, and it's eternal in the heavens. For in this tent, talking about in our body, we groan, longing to put on our heavenly dwelling. If indeed by putting it on, we may not be found naked. For while we are still in this tent, we groan, being burdened, not that we would be unclothed, but that we would be further clothed, so that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life. I think it's important that Paul uses this language because don't we groan sometimes? Don't we just experience life? It's hard to imagine these beautiful, wonderful places when we see hurt and pain and sorrow and turmoil. It's really hard to imagine things that are beautiful beyond our world. We talked about that in class a little bit this morning in the adult class. Sometimes it's really difficult to see beyond our own pain and our own suffering. And it requires faith to know that what we hope in really does exist. So I think Dan Barker's argument breaks down that because he can't feel heaven, he can't feel all these tingly feelings inside, therefore it must not exist, is absolute nonsense. I can promise you I didn't get any tingling feelings about this beach as Stephanie described it. I wasn't like, ooh, I'm getting chills up my spine. It was a description. I trusted her that it existed. But when we went there, wow. It was far better than she described. And I know that heaven is going to be the same way. That any of the descriptions that are in the Bible pale in comparison to what it's actually going to be like. That experience is going to be so magnificent and so wonderful. Paul says that the mortal is going to be swallowed up by life. We understand mortality, right? Anybody in this room ever lose somebody who's close to you? All of us have. And man, does it hurt. It's painful. It's sorrowful. It's sad. Death stings. It hurts. But Paul describes heaven as mortal being swallowed up by life. We understand what life is. Those of us who are parents and grandparents, right? I remember when each of the three of my babies were born. Seeing life is miraculous. It's the only word that I can use to describe birth. When you see birth and you see the life, God's miracle is the only way that you can describe that. It's amazing. It's beautiful. So Paul says, this mortal is swallowed up by life. He who has prepared us for this very thing is God, who has given us the Spirit as a guarantee. How do we know that heaven exists? Because we were stamped with God's Spirit. Do we believe that? We better. His Spirit is our guarantee. So we are always of good courage. We know that while we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight, that sounds a lot like Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. So when people say, well, tell me about this fairy tale mythical God that's up in the sky, I don't get rattled by that. My answer is, gladly, I'll tell you. Well, you can't see him, so he must be fake. Okay, that argument doesn't work. There are tons of places that people describe, and they get so excited and so enthusiastic about describing these places that I've never seen. So should we just assume that those places aren't real? Absolutely not. I have no problem saying that we have faith in the unseen, that we know that heaven exists even though we've never seen it. I have no problem with that. Verse 8, yes, we are of good courage, and we would rather be away from the body and at home with the Lord. So whether we are at home or away, we make it our aim to please him. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may receive what is due for what he has done in the body, whether good or evil. Heaven and hell, they both exist. We're all going to stand before God. And as we talk about this series of wisdom, it is wise to do what is right. It's wise to live right. It's wise to be disciplined. It's wise to work hard for the Lord. It's wise to have faith. It's wise to trust. It's wise to know that when we die, we will receive an inheritance that is absolutely, breathtakingly amazing. We serve an incredible God, and we don't talk about it enough, or at least I don't talk about it enough. I think we really need to describe heaven a lot more, and that we need to teach our kids all about heaven. And we need to teach them right from wrong, and we need to teach them to be disciplined. We need to teach them how to immerse themselves in the Word. Because one day, guys, we all are going to stand before the judgment seat. And I don't think we should be afraid of that. If we truly are stamped with God's Spirit, we need not fear the judgment seat of God. If there's anybody this morning who has any prayer needs, or anybody who's not yet taken that step to put Christ on in baptism, that invitation is open. We invite you to come up, or our shepherds will be in the back as we all stand and sing together.